Commander Alara Voss stood rigid in the heart of the Vanguard's command deck, her sharp eyes tracing the grid lines of the star maps on the massive display. Her mind, as always, was calculating, analyzing every possible outcome. The silence in the room was suffocating, the weight of the decision ahead settling like an unspoken promise. The hum of the ship's systems provided the only sound, a subtle reminder of the machines that powered this final bastion of humanity. Her communications officer's voice sliced through the tension. "Commander, we've intercepted the lead fleet's transmissions. They're less than 2 hours out. The Zaltar Dominion is here." Alara's gaze didn't shift. She hadn't needed confirmation. The signs were everywhere, the nearing presence of the alien warships, the strange silence in the command center, the chill that gripped the air. Still, hearing the words from Lieutenant Carla Cade, cold and undeniable, was enough to make even her stomach churn. "I see," Alara replied, her tone betraying no fear, only calculation. "Continue monitoring. Keep me updated." As she spoke, her mind was already processing the tactical options. The Vanguard had been stationed here for months, hidden on the barren planet Hlar 7, far from the prying eyes of the Dominion. For all their arrogance, the Zaltar had failed to find them. But now the time had come. The time when the Zaltar would find them. And when they did, Alara's fleet would be the final line of defense between humanity's extinction and its survival. Her fingers drummed softly on the edge of the console, eyes narrowing as a sudden thought crossed her mind. They don't know about the Dreadnought. That was the only edge the humans had. The Vanguard was the heart of the resistance, but it was only one ship against thousands. But there was something else, a ship that had gone silent, vanished into the black for years. A human dreadnought, the Aegis, a craft built for war on a scale so vast that the Zaltar had no clue it even existed. It had been a ghost, its sudden reappearance now the only hope for humanity. "Commander, the Zaltar fleet has entered Hlar's gravitational field," Carla's voice broke through her thoughts again. "We're locked in." Alara's heart tightened. "Prepare the fleet. Do not engage until I give the order." The crew sprang to life, following the commander's instructions with military precision. Alara's eyes flicked over the control panel, tracking the distance between them and the enemy. The calm was maddening, like standing on the edge of a cliff and watching the winds gather, knowing the moment of impact would come at any second. "Status on the Aegis?" Alara asked, her gaze still fixed on the display. Carla paused, her fingers dancing over the console before looking up, anxiety flickering in her eyes. "No contact. It's still not responding." "I don't." Alara's lips tightened. "Find it, Lieutenant." "Yes, Commander." The tension between them hung in the air, thick and unresolved. Alara could feel the weight of her own thoughts, the looming dread of failure. She wasn't ready for this. No one was. But the humans had never been prepared for war, had never been ready for the galaxy to look down on them and see them as insignificant. That had always been the Zaltar's mistake. Underestimate humanity, and they would surprise you. "Commander, incoming transmission," Carla spoke again, her voice tense. Alara straightened, her breath steady. "Put it through." The face that appeared on the screen was not human. Zarek, the Dominion's warlord, his dark eyes glaring from behind the alien technology. His voice was smooth, dripping with condescension. "Commander Voss," he began, his tone a mockery of civility. "It's been too long. I've been meaning to meet the one leading humanity's pitiful resistance. I must admit, I am underwhelmed." Alara's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze steady, her words cutting through the air with a sharpness that matched his own. "You've underestimated us before, Zarek," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "That's been your mistake. It will be your last." Zarek chuckled. "I don't need to remind you of the odds, Commander. Your fleet is nothing but a handful of moths circling a star that's about to go supernova. You're playing at survival, but there's no one left to save you." The nerve of him, Alara thought. The Zaltar had decimated human colonies, wiped out entire cities. The thought of them continuing to press forward, with no regard for life, no mercy, it fueled her resolve. She was not afraid. She was not helpless. She had a plan. "We will fight," she said, her voice a hard steel. "And we will win. You'll see soon enough. This time, you're the ones who are outmatched." With a flick of her wrist, the transmission cut off. Elara took a long breath, the weight of the words lingering in the air. She didn't speak for a moment, letting the tension settle over the room. She knew the truth, they had one shot, and it was slipping away. "Commander," Carla spoke, breaking the silence. "I've got it. We're getting a signal from the Aegis, it's coming in at full speed. We're locked on." Elara's heart skipped. It was real. The dreadnought was alive, and it was coming. "Bring it in," Elara ordered, feeling the first flicker of hope. This was the moment that could change everything. "Activate all weapons. Prepare for battle." The tension in the room shifted, an electric charge of anticipation. The human fleet was small, but they were not without strength. Elara stood tall as the crew moved into their positions. A decision had been made. The die had been cast. There was no turning back now. As the countdown to battle began, Elara took a final look at the star map. Her eyes locked on the growing signals of the Zaltar warships. They were almost upon them. The storm was coming. And humanity would not go quietly. The Vanguard was a fortress in the darkness of space, but as the enemy fleet approached, its towering presence seemed almost insignificant. Elara Voss stood before the command console, her gaze piercing the tactical map that displayed the alien warships in a web of menacing red dots. Each one signified destruction, an unstoppable force closing in on her position. "We're outnumbered," Lieutenant Carla Cade said, her voice tight, though she kept her composure. "And they've begun to form a blockade. They're pushing us into a corner." Elara's lips curled into a thin line. She had anticipated this, the Zaltar had perfected the art of surrounding their prey. But this time, the humans had a secret weapon, a weapon that had remained hidden for years. The dreadnought, the Aegis, was coming, and with it, their final chance for survival. "Status on the Aegis?" Elara asked, her tone a controlled calm that belied the storm inside her. Carla hesitated. "We're still tracking it, it's on approach. Estimated time of arrival, 20 minutes. Elara's mind raced. 20 minutes. That was all they had. The odds were stacked against them, and there was no room for error. If the Aegis didn't arrive in time, the human fleet would be swallowed by the Dominion, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. "Redirect all power to shields and weapons. We make our stand here," Elara ordered, her voice unwavering. The crew responded immediately, the hum of the ship's engines intensifying as they prepared for the inevitable onslaught. The first salvo of fire came without warning, a barrage of plasma blasts raining down from the enemy fleet. The Vanguard shuddered as its shields flared, flickering under the intense pressure. Sparks flew from the console, and the crew scrambled to stabilize the ship. "Shields at 70%. Carla reported, her hands moving rapidly over the controls. "Weapons primed and ready. We're holding, but they'll break through soon." Elara clenched her fists, her jaw setting with determination. "We won't let them break us." The Vanguard responded with a volley of its own, unleashing a storm of energy blasts that tore into the hull of the nearest Zaltar ship. It wasn't enough to stop them. The aliens retaliated with greater force, pushing forward relentlessly. The human fleet was holding their ground, but only just. "Commander," came the voice of Ensign Voss, Elara's younger brother, his voice tense with fear, "the Aegis, it's not responding. It's not even showing up on the scanners anymore." Elara turned sharply. "What do you mean, it's not responding?" I don't know. It's as if it vanished." A chill ran through her. Vanished? No. This wasn't happening. This was their last hope, their trump card. "Keep tracking it. Keep looking." "Commander," Carla's voice broke in, "we're being flanked." Zaltar ships are approaching from our rear. Illyra's heart pounded in her chest, but she maintained her composure. Turn the ship. Give them a broadside. Hold them back for as long as we can. Understood. The crew responded with precision, adjusting the ship's course, but the enemy's fire came faster than they could respond. The Vanguard shook violently as another blast hit the port side, and sparks flew from the command panels. Illyra clenched her jaw, forcing her fear down into a cold resolve. She would not let her crew die in vain. And then, just as the pressure became unbearable, a new signal appeared on the radar. A blip. Small at first, then growing larger. Illyra's breath caught in her throat as she saw it, the Aegis. There it is, Carla whispered, awe-filling her voice. Illyra's eyes locked onto the ship's trajectory as it emerged from the void, like a ghost resurrected. The Aegis was more than just a dreadnought, it was a symbol. Humanity's defiance against a galaxy that had written them off. The ship's hull was a patchwork of old and new, its massive weapons gleaming with deadly intent. It wasn't just a ship. It was a statement. The Zaltar were about to understand just how deeply they had underestimated humanity. Tell the Aegis to engage, Illyra ordered, her voice cold, a glint of fury in her eyes. But the transmission was silent. No response came. No reply. Carla's hands flew across the console in frantic motion, but her face turned pale. Commander, it's still not responding. The transmission's being blocked. Illyra's mind raced. She couldn't afford a blockade now. They needed the dreadnought's firepower to turn the tide. Get a direct line to it, now. Use every frequency we have, Illyra snapped, her tone sharp and urgent. Minutes stretched into eternity as the Aegis drew closer, its presence becoming undeniable. The enemy had noticed, too. Several Zaltar ships veered toward the massive vessel, their weapons primed, anticipating the threat. There's no time, Illyra muttered under her breath, then looked up at her crew. Prepare the Vanguard for a full assault. We'll draw the enemy's fire long enough to give the Aegis a chance. With a quick exchange of looks, the crew set to work, recalibrating the ship's systems for maximum firepower. The Vanguard unleashed another round of energy blasts, driving the Zaltar back for a moment, giving the dreadnought a chance to close the distance. Illyra's eyes remained fixed on the sensors, tracking the incoming fire from the enemy. The Aegis's weapons came online, and a wave of energy erupted from the ship's cannons. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, and Illyra's breath caught in her throat. The enemy fleet reeled back, stunned by the intensity of the fire. In a matter of seconds, the Zaltar flagship exploded into brilliant, fiery fragments, scattering debris like confetti across the void. But it wasn't over. Zarek's voice boomed across the comms, a roar of rage and disbelief. You think you've won, human? Illyra's lips curled into a grim smile. We haven't won yet. But we will. She could feel the tide of battle shift, ever so slightly. The Zaltar were retreating, but their arrogance had not been crushed. They would regroup. They would come back stronger. But now, the game had changed. The Aegis was here. And humanity was not done yet. We've got them on the run, Carla said, her voice steady now. It's working, Commander. The Aegis has turned the tide. Illyra exhaled sharply, though the battle was far from over. This is just the beginning. We've got a long fight ahead. Let's finish this. With renewed resolve, Illyra turned her attention back to the tactical display. The Zaltar were retreating, but not for long. The war had only just begun. And humanity would not be easily forgotten. The battlefield was chaos. Explosions painted the void in shades of violent red and blue as the Vanguard and Aegis fought side by side against the retreating Zaltar fleet. But despite the damage dealt to the alien warships, Illyra knew the worst was still ahead. The retreat wasn't a surrender. It was a recalibration. A feint. The Zaltar were too proud, too deadly to simply give up. Illyra, came the frantic voice of Lieutenant Carla Cade. We've got reinforcements. A whole fleet is jumping in from the far side of the system. They're coming straight for us. The dreadnought's massive cannons fired once more, a terrifying burst of energy, but the momentary lull was over. Illyra's heart tightened. Another wave of Zaltar reinforcements, drawn in by their warlord Zarek, was entering the fray. It was no longer just a battle, it was now a war for their survival. Status on the Aegis? Illyra asked, her voice steady despite the rising storm. Carla's fingers flew over the console. The Aegis is holding steady. But the enemy is massing. We need to move fast, Commander. Illyra's eyes swept over the tactical map. Zarek's forces had recovered, and they were no longer cautious. The battle now involved everything, humanity's last hope, the entire fleet, and the sheer will to live. We need to destroy their flagship, Illyra said, eyes locked on the large red dot representing the Zaltar warship. If we cripple Zarek's flagship, the rest will scatter. Carla's voice faltered for a second. And if we don't? Illyra's jaw tightened. We die. The cold reality of the situation slammed into her, but Illyra refused to give in to panic. She couldn't. Not now. The human fleet was small, but it was relentless. The Aegis was powerful, but it had its limits. There was no room for hesitation. The tactical display flickered as more enemy ships dropped out of hyperspace. The Zaltar were surrounding them. Illyra leaned forward, fingers brushing against the console. There was a brief moment of quiet before she spoke. All ships, prepare to engage. Full assault. Her voice cut through the air like a command from the gods. The entire crew responded in unison, their nerves steady under her leadership. Illyra trusted them, as they trusted her. They knew what was at stake. The first wave of fire lit up the black canvas of space, a deadly storm of plasma and laser bolts aimed at the heart of the enemy formation. The Vanguard shuddered as it fired its main guns, releasing a massive blast that shattered the front lines of the Zaltar fleet. For a brief second, Illyra could hear the pounding of her heart in her chest as the ship's systems rattled and groaned. But she ignored it. She wasn't thinking about the ship's groaning hull or the fact that their shield levels were rapidly depleting. She was thinking of one thing, the enemy flagship. Zarek's voice came through the comms again, taunting. You're still here, human. Don't you understand? You're already dead. All of you. Illyra's face remained impassive. Not today, Zarek. This fight is far from over. The Vanguard lurched as it took another hit, but Illyra pushed her focus forward. Lieutenant, I need that last shot ready. Now. Carla's voice was tight. We're working on it, Commander. The Aegis is giving us cover, but it won't hold for long. Then we make it count, Illyra said. We take down their flagship. If we do that, we cripple their morale. The rest will fall apart. A new set of alarms blared across the deck, and Illyra's eyes snapped to the warning lights. Their shields were weakening under the onslaught. The Zaltar had adapted. They were pushing forward, relentless in their pursuit. But then, from the depths of space, the Aegis loomed larger, like a dark star cutting through the chaos. Its cannons fired again, and for a moment, the Zaltar fleet faltered. Their formation shattered as the Aegis's blasts tore through their lines, sending shockwaves that rippled across the battlefield. Now! Illyra shouted. The Vanguard's weapons fired in rapid succession, and a series of massive explosions lit up the enemy flagship. The mighty warship shook, its massive structure tearing apart in waves of fire and debris. Zarek's flagship was crumbling, and with it, the Zaltar's stranglehold on the battlefield began to slip. But just as the tide seemed to turn, a surge of energy pulsed from the Zaltar fleet. The retreat was over. The remaining warships surged forward, vengeful and vicious, their guns trained on the human ships. Zarek, barely alive, was still rallying his forces. We've got incoming. Carla cried. They're hitting us with everything they've got. The Vanguard rocked violently as enemy fire struck their hull. Sparks flew from the console, and the lights flickered. Ilara's mind raced. The Aegis was their advantage, but even it couldn't hold off this much firepower. They had moments, not minutes. "Ready the last weapon," Ilara ordered, her voice sharp, commanding. We pushed them back once and for all. The crew responded quickly, and the final salvo from the Vanguard was fired with all the energy they had left. The blast hit the heart of the Zaltar formation, creating a rift in their lines, and for a moment, their ships faltered. It was just long enough. Zarek, his flagship crippled, turned his forces away. "Retreat," he screamed. "Regroup. This isn't over." Ilara watched, breathless, as the Zaltar warships slowly began to fall back. The tide had shifted. The human forces were victorious, at least for now. The Aegis moved into the heart of the enemy's remains, finishing off the scattered fleet with a final, decisive blast. Ilara leaned back, her hands still clutching the console as if she could will the chaos into order. The alarms had ceased, but the damage was done. The Vanguard was crippled, its shields down to nearly nothing. The crew was exhausted, but they had done the impossible. "Commander, we've done it," Carla said, her voice soft, disbelief lacing her tone. Ilara exhaled, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lifting from her shoulders. "Yes. We've won. But the war isn't over. This is only the beginning." As she looked out at the stars, Ilara knew that this victory was hard-earned, but it had come at a cost. The enemy might have retreated, but they were far from defeated. Humanity had survived, but the fight was far from over. And Ilara Voss would see it through, to the very end.